This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast, I'll be looking over the game against Tottenham by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, James McArthur, Patrick Van and Wan-Bissaka after the game. So let's begin. It went to the final minutes, but Palace's battling performance against Tottenham Hotspur ended in defeat. Up against it, the Eagles put their bodies on the line to deny the visitors for 88 minutes and were inches away from a big point until Harry Kane struck. Spurs had two early chances to take the lead but failed to take them. The first saw a Ben Davies cutback cleared for a corner. Minutes later, a chance fell to Harry Kane after Patrick Van attempted clearance, but the England striker was denied by a point-blank range save by Wayne Hennessy in the Palace goal. The first half was largely spent in the Palace half, but Spurs struggled to fashion any clear-cut chances against a Jordan determined back line. All of the Eagles' defensive players were called into action throughout the first 45, with debutant Aaron Wan-Bissaka impressing. It was all square at the break, and the second half then continued in a similar vein to the first, Spurs enjoying much of the possession and Palace looking to exploit openings on the counter. Kane could and should have notched the game's opening goal in 55 minutes, but somehow stabbed the ball wide unmarked from 5 yards out. Despite their dominance on the ball, Spurs struggled to break through Palace's lines. McArthur and Milivojević-Riedewald ran themselves into the ground to deny the visitors any space, protecting the back four and harrying the opposition. Sørloth had a golden opportunity on 84 minutes, arriving onto a low cross at the back post, but the ball got caught in his feet and he somehow failed to convert. Kane then flashed an effort across goal and wide as Palace weathered the storm. However, it was late heartbreak for the Eagles. A deep Spurs corner found Kane at the back post, and he guided a cushioned header across the face of goal and into the far side of the net on 88 minutes. The final few minutes passed without any incident, leaving Palace without a point to show for their hard work. Tottenham left it late as they won 1-0 against Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park on Sunday afternoon. Harry Kane netted the only goal of the game 2 minutes from time, heading home Christian Eriksen's corner to give Spurs all 3 points from the London derby. It was tough on Palace, who batted well and arguably did enough to get a point, keeping their informed visitors at bay with a resolute and determined display. But what did we learn from the game? Here are 5 things. Number 1. 20's plenty. Crystal Palace Academy product Aaron Wan-Bissaka was thrown in at a deep end, making his Eagles debut against Tottenham in a London derby. But a 20-year-old academy graduate did not look out of place in the Palace side and acquitted himself well against the quality side in the Spurs team. He got stuck in and did well against Eric Lamela and Christian Eriksen and earned praise from manager Roy Hodgson for his efforts. And with Palace in the middle of an injury crisis, he may be needed again in the coming weeks, with Timothy Fosu-Mensah unable to face his parent club Manchester United in Palace's next game. Number 2. Third time lucky. Crystal Palace defended resolutely and limited Spurs to very few opportunities over the course of the 90 minutes. Harry Kane had the best of them, with 2 gilt-edged opportunities in the game prior to his goal. One in the first half, when Patrick Van failed to deal with a cross in the box and inadvertently gifting the ball straight to Harry Kane from 10 yards out in the first half. Fortunately for him, Wayne Hennessy was there to deny the England keeper and spare Van Aanholt's blushes. Kane then spurred another clear sight on goal early in the second half, screwing his shot wide from 6 yards out after being found unmarked in the box. But he showed that he can't keep a good striker down, as it proved third time lucky late on, with Kane heading home the winner after raising above Damien Delaney to nod past Wayne Hennessy, despite the Welshman getting a hand to his header. Number 3. More promising signs from Sørloth. Once again a Norwegian international put in a decent display for the Eagles. Following on from his Eagles bow at Everton last time out, he made his home debut here, lining up on the left-hand side of the front three, and proving an outlet for Palace, with his direct running helping relieve pressure and give the Eagles an option going forward. He also had a penalty shout after bursting into the box in the second half, and offered another positive for Palace in defeat, impressing again with his work rate. Number 4. Throwing it away. 3 times Tottenham fullback Sergio Aurier was penalised for a foul throw. Each time it looked to be the correct call, but each time it was much to the frustration of the Spurs man. But perhaps the most surprising thing about it is that he kept being given the throw-ins to take. However, Spurs boss Mauricio Pochettino promised supporters after the game that there would be more practice on throw-ins in training. And number 5, is Ali an easy target? Prior to the game there was plenty of discussions about Tottenham midfielder Dele Alli amid accusations of diving in recent weeks. Palace boss Roy Hodgson was adamant that Ali, who he'd worked with during his time as England manager, does not dive. But there were question marks once again over the Spurs and England man and his involvement in 2 separate incidents in the second half. The first was when Ali went down in the box under a challenge from Patrick Vannano, with referee Kevin Friend dismissing the Tottenham man's shout for a penalty. And then Ali went to ground when going for a ball with Wayne Hennessy, with no penalty awarded once again as the Tottenham star endured the wrath of the Palace fans. Both managers were asked about Ali in their post-match press conferences, with Pochettino describing the England man as an easy target, while Hodgson said that he felt that Ali was a victim of the mass media discussing the subject, which he says has filtered through to the public. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at @Crystal for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to join in with discussions, also a great place to share your opinions with other fans, and much like a forum, it's also a great place to upload videos, photos, and any news articles you've found online that you want to share with other Palace fans, then of course do feel free to do that on the Facebook group. So if you are someone who does like social media, likes to have all the latest news, but also likes to have discussions with other Palace fans, then of course do follow us on both Twitter and Facebook, and of course do also join the Facebook group. Now another great place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, rating the players' performances from 1 to 10, with obviously 10 being the best. And even if you don't want to do this, and even if you are, let's say, a Tottenham fan and you've come to the video, do also comment below with your views of the game. You know, who you thought the best player was, how bad the defending was for the corner, how good you think Harry Kane is, and whether you do think actually if James Tompkins didn't go off, maybe Palace could have gone on to draw the game. So along with commenting with your player ratings where you rate the players' performances, do also feel free to put your views of the game, so that obviously myself, I can obviously come back and look at the video and see what the listeners thought, but also any other Palace fans or Tottenham fans that come to the video, they can obviously listen to my opinion, but also they can read the comments section and see what other fans also thought about the game. Now of course, if you do want to follow any of these social media pages and join the Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting in goal with Wayne Hennessy, who I'm going to give an 8. Superb save to deny Kane from close range after a terrible mistake from Vannano. Fairly quiet for the rest of the first half. Good save to deny Sergio Aurier on his right, and then an even better one at full stretch low to deny Ben Davies. Harsh to pick out the ball of the net after a good afternoon. So Wayne Hennessy here, I've given him an 8, and he's a player who's been up for quite a lot of debate on social media. You know, people using him once again as a scapegoat, blaming him for the goal. But actually, if you look at the goal aside, if you just look at the game as a whole, ignoring the goal, he actually had a fantastic game. Hence why I've given him the 8. And to be honest, I'm not really going to dwell too much on the goal because I'll go on to talk a bit later on about who I thought was at fault for the goal. But if you look back at the replays, Hennessy gets a hand to it, so at least he's tried to save it, but because it's at such close range, and obviously the fact that the 3 defenders around him didn't even bother to jump, so Kane was free to head it down. Because of that, because he had so much space and because it was at close range, I personally think Hennessy didn't have a chance to save it. So I can understand there being a bit of debate and, you know, people being quite frustrated the fact that Hennessy didn't save that, but the fact that he still got a hand to it, and the fact that it was the marking at the corner which wasn't good enough that led to us conceding the goal, personally for me, that's where I see the mistake there. You know, I don't see the mistake in Hennessy, I see it in the defence. And really, if people want to blame him, I think that's really unfair, because actually, if you look at other than picking the ball out of his net, he had an absolutely fantastic game, and like I've said, that's why I've given him the 8. Now obviously, the reason he had such a good game is because he made quite a number of really brilliant saves, and his overall play was quite good. So there was one in the first half in particular, a brilliant save from Harry Kane. Yes, it was a bit stupid from Van Aanholt, you know, a stupid mistake from him, obviously passing the ball across the face of goal. We've seen him do that a few times this season, but after that, Van Aanholt got better, and after that, Hennessy seemed to improve. That sort of save from Harry Kane, the best striker currently in Europe, in my opinion. But the fact that Hennessy made that save seemed to boost his confidence, because whenever he had to be called upon to make a good save or make a big save as the game went on, he was obviously able to do that. But to be honest, if you look at the first half in isolation, yes, other than that save from Kane, he had sort of an average half, purely because we were playing so resolutely defensively. Tottenham didn't really have any chances, so he was quiet for the rest of that half. And then in the second half, once again, obviously he made a few saves here and there, but there were two in particular. One from Sergio Aurier, where he obviously cut in from the right, had a shot on goal, and Hennessy made a good save on that. And another one from Ben Davies. Obviously the ball was bouncing around in the box. Davies has just gone and whacked it. And even though there was about 5-6 players, both Palace and Tottenham players, in front of Hennessy, obviously blocking his view, he was able to get down, not only get down quick enough, but also he was able to stretch really far to tip that away. So like I've said, two different types of saves in terms of Aurier's one was more centred to the goal, and Hennessy just had to dive, and obviously the Ben Davies one he had to stretch. But both of them are good saves, and of course did keep us in the game. But like I've said already, unfortunately we did obviously go on to lose the game from a Harry Kane strike. So personally for me, because he made all of these good saves at 0-0 to keep us in the game, and because he was unlucky with the goal, I actually thought that overall, other than picking up the ball off his own net, I thought he had a really good performance. But I've seen, I've looked on the BBS, I've looked on Twitter, and the overall feeling is, yes, he made some good saves, but some would blame him for the goal, which, like I've said already, is a bit unfair. But also another thing I saw someone pick up is, his command of the box, and that is actually something which I've seen improve in recent weeks, in terms of him actually talking to the back line, shouting if there's been a mistake made, and shouting to make sure everyone's in position. That's improved drastically over the last few weeks, and whether that's just his form improving or whether the new goalkeeping coach has done that, whatever it is, that seems to be improving. But maybe in this game, even though he's been good recently, the last few games, although he's been good there, maybe this was just an off game, because unlike them games, he obviously wasn't commanding the box as good as he has done in the past. But Wayne Hennessy here, 3 fantastic saves in the game to keep us in the game. Unlucky not to keep out the goal, so personally for me, I think an 8 is a fair result. Now to move on to the right back, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who I'm going to give a 7. A couple good balls cut out by the debutant up against Eric Lamela and also Christian Eriksen. He'd be happy with his performance. So Aaron Wan-Bissaka here, I've given him a 7, and much like the performance of the whole team and also the defence in particular, I thought with this being quite a resolute performance, I thought the defence actually done quite well. And much like what I said with Hennessy, it was quite unlucky to concede the goal in the manner we did, purely because of how well we defended up until that point. But personally for me, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, he's obviously 20 years old, come through the Palace youth team, thrown in at a deep end against a fantastic Spurs team, in-form Spurs team, obviously coming off a few wins and a few draws lately, so they're in quite good form. But I think with him being thrown in the deep end, I thought he'd done a fantastic job playing in that right back role. If you look at the game as a whole and you look at the team, he didn't look out of place, which really is just a credit to how well he played in this game. So really for me, I do think a 7 really just sums up how good his performance was. But in terms of what he'd done in the game, yes, he may not have been the fantastic, the fantastic right back which we've all been missing, but the fact that he's able to come into the job, never played first team football, and the fact that he's able to put in such a good shift is obviously good to see. And one of the things I picked up quite a lot is, quite a lot of the time, Spurs were looking to get the ball out wide. As soon as they'd done that, I thought that Aaron Wan-Bissaka, if it came down his side, he was able to cut quite a lot of them balls out. So if you look at the stats, he made quite a few tackles and blocks, which really just shows that he was ready to put his body in the way of Spurs' chances. And certainly in terms of the first half and the beginning of the second half, when Spurs had loads of possession, had loads of chances, the fact that someone like Wan-Bissaka was able to actually cut them out and block them is obviously great to see, because if you stop the other team from getting balls into the box, then obviously you restrict them chances that the likes of Harry Kane do have to score to score from. Now in terms of the players he was against, Eric Lamela, Christian Eriksen, they've been playing pretty well recently for Spurs, and actually I thought them two players in particular, they've got pace, they've got skill, so it's going to be quite difficult for any right back to deal with them. And I thought that Aaron done really well in terms of matching their standard, in terms of stopping them getting through on goal. And when you consider the goal actually came from a corner, so there was no real creativity, I suppose. There was no sort of mistake defensively in terms of them running into the box. It was just a set piece goal defensively. That was the mistake from the defending from the corner, not because there was a mistake in the field of play. So really for me, I think that you can't really fault Wan-Bissaka for his performance. And to be honest, he can look back at the game. He can look back in a few days time. Looking back, it's looking like he'll play the United game, so he can look back at his performance and be really happy with it. And hopefully, with him getting a bit of a confidence boost from playing his first game at Selhurst, hopefully playing another one against Manchester United next week, hopefully that can help him to do really well in this game. But obviously, overall, a really good performance from him. Good debut, like I said, winning lots of tackles, showing good pace, and obviously a decent touch here and there. But personally for me, the thing that's really surprising, this is not necessarily about his performance as a whole, but he's the first Palace Academy player to make a full team debut in 2,148 days. So, if you look at that, it's 5 years, 10 months and 16 days, obviously to Sunday, since Carl da Silva made his full league debut in a 2-0 defeat against Southampton, which really just shows we apparently have this good academy, we've got loads of players coming through, but it's taken nearly 5 years, nearly 6 years for an academy player to come through, which really just shows that actually the academy hasn't been doing as well as it has been. But actually the fact that a player from the academy has come into the first team, been thrown in at a deep end, and actually has put in a good performance, actually sort of shows that maybe we should be putting a bit more trust in our academy players, because as Wan-Bissaka has showed here, actually he can still do a job here. And the fact that we went nearly 6 years without an academy player coming through is quite annoying. It's not great, but I still think that Carl da Silva, his career didn't really go, or he didn't stay with Palace, but I'm sure Aaron Wan-Bissaka getting that chance in the first team and actually putting in a good performance, hopefully there'll be more to come from him in the upcoming weeks. To be honest, just to summarise his performance, yes, I gave him the 7 because I thought defensively he was great, winning tackles, showing good pace, going forward. Maybe you want your fullback to cross into the ball, and I think that's one of the parts of the game that Wan-Bissaka lacked in this game against Spurs. He lacked that composure when he got forward to deliver the ball, because quite a lot of the time he was able to bomb forward, use his pace to get in behind, but he was just lacking that final bit of end product with his crossing. And I know his crossing's not bad, because for the under-23s last Tuesday, he literally ran the length of the pitch, put in a fantastic cross, and I believe it was Daly scored for the under-23. So he's got that skill in terms of running to the byline and crossing in, but maybe the occasion got to him, and on this occasion, whenever he got forward, he lacked that bit of composure. And something else which I picked up as well is the stat, his passing accuracy was 35%, but like I said, defensively he was good, and maybe he just lacked that composure when he was on the ball. But to be honest, I think he can be really proud of his performance, and hopefully in the upcoming weeks, when we obviously need him to play with the injuries and with players not available to play against their parent clubs, hopefully we can get him to step up his performance and put in another good shift in the coming weeks. Now to move on to the centre-back, Tim Fosu-Mensah, who I'm going to give a 7. Fairly solid and managed to clear any of the danger. So Fosu-Mensah here, I've given him a 7, and unlike his performance against Everton, where playing at centre-back, where he hasn't played for most of the season other than the first few games, he obviously played at centre-back here again alongside James Tompkins, and actually his performance here against Tottenham was the complete opposite of the one against Everton, because I thought in this game here he was fairly solid, done really well defensively in terms of improving his performance from that game against Everton, but also he done so well in terms of stopping the likes of Harry Kane from scoring, and the fact that we were able to keep one of the best attacks in the league, not the best but one of the best, we were able to stop them and restrict him to as few chances as possible. You obviously got to give credit to Fosu-Mensah, and personally for me, yes, we know he's much better at a right back, not the best right back, but he's much better there, even though you can do a shift at centre back here, and once again proving that maybe the Everton game was a bit of a blip, because once again here he picked up his performance from that Everton game and put in a really good shift here. But one of the main things about his performance which I liked is, yes, there were a few little dodgy bits like Van Aanholt's performance, but I thought that once he got going, whenever there was any danger in the box, rather than just trying to, over dribble it or just trying to pass it around the back, all he would do is just clear the danger. So whenever Spurs had the chance in the box and we were able to get possession back, we'll just clear it as quick as possible and obviously that's quite a good thing, because all it does is it just gets rid of the pressure as quick as possible, and that sort of seemed to improve Fosu-Mensah's performance, because against Everton he didn't do that, he didn't clear his lines quick enough, whereas here against Tottenham, whenever he had a chance, he'd clear the ball, get rid of that danger as quick as possible. So personally for me, I think a 7's a really fair result. You know, he didn't do anything fantastic in the game, and there wasn't really anything of note to talk about, but like I've said already, you know, you've got to say that even though he's a right back playing out of position, I thought he'd done really well, and he's picked himself up from that disappointing performance against Everton, and probably shown us that actually, even though he's not the best at centre back, he can still play that that position. But personally for me, the main thing about his performance is, yes, he was solid in this game and he almost kept a clean sheet against Spurs, but the main thing for me is the fact that he was able to be significantly better playing at centre back than he was against Everton. So for me personally, yes, his performance was great, but the fact that he improved was the main reason I've given him a 7. Now to move on to the centre back James Tomkins, who I'm going to give an 8. Alert and didn't put a foot wrong in the first half. Continued to do well in the second half. He's been really good this season, but he went off injured, so let's hope it's not too serious. So James Tomkins here, I've given him an 8, and much like the performance of Wayne Hennessy in terms of keeping us in the game for quite large periods of it, I think that James Tomkins done a superb job of doing that and fully deserves to get the 8. But in terms of his first half performance, I thought that half in particular, there was quite a lot of onslaught from Tottenham. They were attacking us quite a lot, and I actually thought that Tomkins didn't put a foot wrong. Obviously, in terms of defending, he done exactly what was expected of him, you know, in terms of clearing the danger or just being quite composed in passing it back to Hennessy or playing it out from the back. And in terms of going forward as well, I think in possession, in terms of getting us forward and distributing the ball, I think he done quite a lot there. And the word I used to describe his performance was alert. And really that just summarises his game overall, but especially the first half, in terms of Tottenham had so many chances, but because he was alert, he was able to, you know, nullify Spurs' chances because he was aware of what was happening around him. Now in terms of the second half, obviously that was just as good as the first half, and that sort of good performance continued into the second half. But to be honest, there isn't really much to say about his overall game because it was just so good. So that's why I've given him the 8. But if you look at the season so far, this is the longest spell he's been in the team, and actually he's just been really good this season. He's one of the more consistent players for us, and very rarely puts in a below a 7 performance, which really just epitomises how good he is as a player. But obviously we did go on to concede later on, and I personally think that because James Tomkins went off, we brought Damien Delaney on, he wasn't ready, and the mistake came from primarily Delaney, which just shows actually, I'm sure that even though he went off injured, and we obviously hope it's not too serious, but the fact that Delaney came on and made the mistake really just shows actually how good of a performance Tomkins had, in the fact that as soon as Tomkins went off, we conceded, which really just shows how important and how good Tomkins was in this game. Now in terms of the injury, you know, we obviously hope it's not too serious, but judging by what Roy Hodgson said, it isn't that serious, it's just a bit of severe cramp, which of course it's severe, so he had to go off. But if you look back at it, it looks like Tomkins wanted to stay on the pitch, but obviously Roy Hodgson, not knowing what it was, didn't want to risk it, and fair enough, considering the fact that Tomkins has had his fair share of injury issues. But I certainly do think if he felt he could have carried on, then I don't see any reason why he couldn't have. But because it's only severe cramp, that should be fine within a few hours. So hopefully he can get back fit, and hopefully, you know, make sure he doesn't get cramp again, so he can start the next game against United here. But overall, I think an 8 is a fair result. You know, like I've said already, a really great alert performance. You know, tackles and blocks everywhere, much like Fosu-Mensah. So in terms of stopping Spurs, he done whatever he could. And actually, if you look at the game as a whole, you know, I talked about the first and second halves differently, apart from themselves. But actually, overall, I thought he defended really well. And actually, like I've said already, I thought we probably would have gone on to get the point if he stayed on the pitch. So do comment below with your thoughts about his performance, and obviously about the injury and how important he is. And also do comment below whether you do think that actually if he stayed on the pitch, we would have gone on to get the point. So James Tomkins here, I think an 8 is a fair result. Now to move on to the left back, Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 6. A woeful mistake nearly gifted Harry Kane a goal, but Hennessy came to his rescue. Not a bad first period after that. Had a fair bit of the ball throughout the game. So Patrick Van Aanholt here, I've given him a 6, and unlike his performance against Everton, where he wasn't necessarily great, but he wasn't that bad. You know, this performance here, it was slightly better, and actually if you look at the game as a whole, I thought that maybe offensively you could argue that he was actually one of our better players. Now before I go on to talk about his performance and, you know, the good things about it and the reason I've given him a 6, we've got to talk about that horrible mistake he made which almost cost us a goal. You know, early on in the game, he gets the ball on the edge of the Palace box, tries to play it into Hennessy, completely messes that up, gives the ball to Harry Kane, and luckily for Palace, Wayne Hennessy's there, made himself big, and obviously made that massive save to stop Harry Kane. So other than that mistake which Van Aanholt did, you know, which was woeful in terms of just gifting the ball to Harry Kane, you know, why just give the best striker currently in Europe, just give him the ball freely? Well, you know, just if you put that aside, actually it was a really good performance, and the fact that he was able to recover from that mistake was of course great to see. And once again, talking about Hennessy's performance, the fact that Hennessy was there to make up for that mistake was also great to see as well. But after that mistake, I thought he grew into the game, and actually after that mistake, I think his first half in particular was really good. You know, normally you see players like that who get sort of hurt and wounded by a mistake they made, but I thought that actually Van Aanholt did actually slowly grow into the game. And in terms of the second half, you know, I mentioned slightly a minute ago in you know, the fact that he was actually quite good offensively and he was trying to get us forward as much as possible. The reason he done that is because even though we didn't have much of the ball, you know, only 30% of the ball, even when we didn't have a lot of the ball, even when we did get the ball, he actually had quite a lot of it and actually tried to create as many chances as possible. And, you know, one in particular was a fantastic cross from the left-hand side he put into the area, and it just missed both Sørloth and Benteke, which actually shows that actually, yes, he may make the odd mistake at the back, but actually going forward he can occasionally put in a fantastic cross. But overall, you know, yes, there were a few clumsy moments here and there, but ultimately, because he slowly grew into the game, that was expected at the beginning. But after that mistake, he definitely, you know, got better, and he's got that quality and that talent to be a really good left back. And we saw that in glimpses here against Tottenham in terms of his defensive and offensive play. But he's obviously got to cut out these little mistakes here and there, and hopefully his overall game will improve drastically. And in terms of the final point, really, you know, we know how good Aurier has been this season. Yes, he's been red carded and he's been taken off quite a lot of times for Tottenham, but quite a lot of games I think Aurier is quite a good asset for Spurs in terms of his pace. And I think that Van Aanholt, who also has got the pace, I think he done really well to match Aurier for pace, and occasionally at times just to roast Aurier in terms of getting past him. And, you know, especially in the second half, there was at least one or two good runs which came from Van Aanholt actually running past Aurier, which actually shows that actually, even though you could argue that Aurier is the better player, the fact that Van Aanholt was obviously able to get past him obviously shows some of his good qualities. So personally for me, I think a 6 is a good result for the left back. Now to move on to the midfielder and captain Luka Milivojević, who I am going to give a 7. The skipper put in a shift in front of the defence and kept Dele Alli quiet. Energy levels were decent and concentration on point. So Luka Milivojević here, the captain, you know, there's not much to say about him because his performances week in, week out are very consistent and are always to a high standard. But in terms of this performance here, yes, he may not have been as great as the likes of Tompkins and Hennessy, but he's still done a job in the team, hence why I've given him a 7. But in terms of his overall performance, you know, much like all of the games he plays, you know, he's rarely ever below a 7. But he always puts in a shift in front of the back four, so giving them that little bit of protection, making tackles, making blocks, everything like that he'd done in this game here, which was great to see. And obviously Dele Alli, yes, he hasn't been great recently, but actually, you know, in this game he was quite a menace for Spurs. But actually the fact that Luka Milivojević playing in front of the back four, his job was to keep Dele Alli quiet, and he'd done that quite successfully. But in terms of his overall performance here, obviously what I've just talked about there is basically what he does every game in terms of keeping the creative players quiet and obviously just putting in a shift defensively in front of the back four. But in terms of this game here, I thought his energy levels were really decent. They were on point in terms of having that stamina to go for the whole game and, you know, putting in enough power into shots and into tackles and doing everything right in the game. He showed really decent levels of that, and also concentration. So against Everton there was lapses of concentration which meant that we conceded the goals, whereas here against Spurs the concentration of Luka but also the whole team was on point. He knew exactly what he had to do, he knew what the game plan was, and as the captain he had to concentrate on the game and made sure everyone knows or knew what they had to do. So really for me, energy levels were decent, but also concentration as well, you know, in terms of making that tackle at the right point, making the right block, or, you know, putting that, when he went forward, putting that right pass out wide, whatever it was in the game, I thought he'd done really well in terms of that. But in terms of a few stats, you know, he had 8 interceptions in the game, which really just shows once again how well he was doing in terms of stopping Spurs' attacks. But also he kept things ticking. So obviously you talk about the midfield battle. Yes, Spurs had 70% possession, but the fact that Luka was able to keep things going, keep our midfield going, and just making sure that we weren't getting overrun, that was of course great to see. And like I said, you know, this season he started to bring a more forward game, or a more forward, I suppose a forward play to his game. And actually, in terms of that, in this game here, there was quite a few times in the game actually where he had quite a lot of decent passing forward. So once again, showing that yes, he can do a job defensively, but also he can still, you know, you can still pass the ball out from the back. Now the final points really for me is, you know, good free kicks. We've been saying this for weeks in terms of Kabay. Obviously he wasn't in the squad to play here because he got injured, but he was one of these players who continuously kept being given the set pieces, but they weren't very good deliveries. Whereas Luka here, because there's no other option, you know, other than Townsend, up steps Luka Milivojević to take the free kicks. And actually all of the free kicks he took were very good. And once again, for me personally, I'd rather see Luka on the free kicks, because all of the free kicks he takes, the deliveries are good. All of the corners he takes are on point. So personally for me, because he's so good at taking set pieces, I think that he needs to carry on taking them. Not because Kabay necessarily isn't good at them, purely because of most of the time, you know, Kabay's ones are 50-50, whereas Luka's ones are much better and also much more consistent. But the final thing really for me is, you know, I'll go on to talk about Riedewald in a minute, but I thought that them two formed quite a good partnership in midfield. But the only downside to that is, yes, they're very good defensively, but because they haven't got a lot of pace, if you've got someone like Son, for example, who came off the bench, or someone like Lucas, you know, you've got players like that who have got lots of pace. And yes, we did struggle a little bit on that, but because our fullbacks had pace, that was all covered. But the fact that our midfield lacked a bit of pace isn't ideal. But I still thought that even though they don't have the most pace, I still thought that actually that Milivojević-Riedewald partnership, I thought that worked really well. And actually for me, even though if Kabay comes back for the United game, I personally think he starts on the bench purely because of how well Luka and Jario played together. I personally think, why change something which isn't broken? It's clearly showed against Man City, against Tottenham here on Sunday. It showed that that partnership works really well. So hopefully Roy Hodgson will see that, and obviously in the next few games he will play a system that obviously includes both Riedewald and Milivojević in that defensive midfield role. Now to move on to Jario Riedewald, who I am going to give a 7. Not much from the Dutchman in the first half, but did a job as the game went on. So Riedewald here, I've given him a 7, and much like the performance of Luka in terms of making interceptions, blocks, and just being that guy to protect the back four, I thought he'd done that superbly in this game. But to be honest, the main reason I've given him a 7, other than sort of 8s that people have given him, is purely because the first half, you know, there wasn't much from him in the first half. I think most of it was down to Tompkins and Luka and Hennessy in terms of our defensive solidity. But I still thought that actually, even though his first half wasn't great, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great, I still thought in the second half, with much more pressure coming from Tottenham, with them playing a lot better, I actually thought in the second half he'd done a really, really great job. But like I've already mentioned with Luka, I thought that the partnership with Luka was really great. And actually, like I've said, Kabay's injured. If he comes back into the side, for me, I don't think he gets into starting 11, purely because we need to see more of this Luka-Riedewald partnership, purely because it's actually working really well and actually looks really solid, you know, really looks solid in a game when these two guys play together. But to be honest, in the second half, like I've said already, he was probably one of the better players. And even though he was playing defensively, because he's so good at passing, quite a lot of the time he would be that creative spark that comes into the, you know, picks up the ball from deep, drives forward, and quite a lot of the time, you know, passes to Sørloth, for example, I thought they were great in the game. And I actually thought that even though he's playing as a defensive midfielder, in terms of him actually getting forward and spreading the ball, sort of, you know, doing that Ajax style thing in terms of passing the ball along from defensive midfield, I thought he'd done that really, really good in this game. But personally for me, I've given him a 7. There isn't really much to say about his performance because he was one of these players who quietly went about his business. But personally for me, I do think a 7 is a fair result. Now to move on to James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 7. Great energy and helped us press. His pass success was very high and far superior to the rest of our players. A key player right now. So James McArthur here, I've given him a 7, and although there's quite a lot of debate in terms of his performance, you know, some people, like the Croydon Advertiser for example, saying his performance was really bad, whereas Sky Sports actually nominating him for the Man of the Match award. Yes, I don't believe he got it, but the fact that he was up there with one of the nominations shows how good his performance was. But personally for me, I'm somewhere in the middle, you know, although people have said his performance was great, I personally don't think it was quite up to the standard of someone like Tompkins or Luca, but I still thought he had a really great performance, and of course his performance is up for debate, so do comment below what you think. But in terms of his performance, I think a 7 is a really fair result. You know, some people have given him 8, some people have given him 6s, so I personally think for me a 7 is a really fair reflection of how he played. Now in terms of what he gave to the team, you know, obviously like always he gives us great energy, so great pressing ability, and obviously with us trying to restrict Spurs, we played quite a high press, and ultimately that restricted them to chances purely because they had no options going forward. And personally for me, the fact that McArthur was pushed up so far obviously restricted them to the amount of chances they could have had. And in terms of a stat, you know, I'm not sure of his exact pass success rate, but it was very high, which shows, you know, it's just showing actually if he can play slightly further forward from the defensive midfielders and let Luca and Riedewald just sit back there, because he's got quite a good passing ability, he could be the guy to create attacks. And although he may not be the most creative player, the fact that he's obviously able to have such a high success rate in passing means that actually going forward we're more likely to create chances purely because once again of how good his passing ability is. And obviously if you compare his passing ability to the rest of the side, his one was far superior to other players on the field, which really just highlights actually how an important player he can be in terms of, because he's so good at passing the ball, we need to actually get the ball to him as much as possible, because he's probably, other than Wilf when he plays, he's probably our most attacking threat, one of our biggest sparks going forward. Now in terms of the injuries we've got, obviously it's not ideal having 12 injuries, but if we have someone like McArthur who's versatile, can play defensive, play further forward, and obviously once again has got that passing ability, he's going to be a key player for us in terms of keeping us in this league. And if we can carry on with performances like this where he pushes, you know, he presses the opposition and he, you know, uses his passing ability to create chances, then hopefully he'll be a big asset for us in the upcoming weeks. But in terms of the only downside of his performance, and maybe possibly the reason why people gave him 6s, which I felt was unfair, is because there was one chance in the first half, a really big chance. He obviously arrived late into the box, had a shot, there wasn't quite enough power on it, so really, you know, had a chance there to take the lead, didn't take it, and ultimately we went on to lose the game. So you could say that that missed chance got punished. And in terms of the second half, some people said he was quite anonymous in the second half. I wouldn't go that far to say that, but I would definitely say that his first half performance was a lot better than his second half performance. But personally for me, I think for the first half you'll probably give him an 8, and probably for the second half performance you'll probably give him a 7. So overall I do think a 7 is a fair reflection of his game, and actually like I've said already, he's a really important player for the team, but purely because of how good he can pass the ball, his offensive ability, and obviously, you know, how he helps us press. So personally for me, James McArthur, I think a 7 is a fair result. Now to move on to the winger Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 6. A couple of decent runs and deliveries in the first half. Took the pressure off at times running with the ball. Taken off for Chung Lee. So Andros Townsend here, I've given him a 6, and much like his performances have been recently, it was another average performance from him. Not to say it was bad, but it weren't necessarily particularly good as well. So personally for me, I think a 6, an average result, is really just a fair way to sum up his whole performance as a whole. But in terms of the reasons I've given him a 6 as opposed to maybe a 5 or a 7 if he had a really good game, it's purely because, yes, he wasn't great, but there were quite a lot of the time where, because obviously Tottenham were playing, you know, putting so much pressure on us, the only time we could get forward was if we had a chance on the counter-attack. So whenever we had a chance to go forward, Andros Townsend was one of these players who actually made quite a lot of decent runs, and actually, even though he didn't put in that many balls into the box, in the first half particularly, there were quite a few deliveries that he put into the area. Yes, they all evaded the men in the box, but, you know, at least he was getting forward and trying to create something from the rare foray forwards we had. Because like I've said already, yes, we were putting a high press on Spurs, but Spurs were dominating us in the midfield, which basically meant we didn't have that many chances going forward. So the only chance, or the only time we could get forward, is if we hit Spurs on the break. We've done that a few times, and personally for me, looking back at the game, maybe you could say that Andros Townsend was one of the key plays in terms of our counter-attacks. Now in terms of, you know, being under so much pressure from Tottenham, because of that, Townsend quite a lot of the time picked up the ball and just ran with it, you know, not necessarily looking to score or to get a cross in, just taking pressure off the back four. He'd done that quite a lot in the game, which was quite good, you know, actually picking up the ball and running off with it. And to be honest, for me, I didn't necessarily see a drop in his performance in the second half. So actually, much like many fans, I was actually quite surprised when he got taken off for Chung Lee, because much like the substitution of James Tompkins, you take off Tompkins, you take off Townsend, two players who were doing reasonably well. Well, Tompkins better, but doing reasonably well in the game. You take them off, obviously that changes the complexion of the game, and you eventually go on to concede with two of the players actually having a part to play in that goal. So for me personally, I would like to see Townsend stay on the pitch, because I personally, watching the game, couldn't really see he was tired, so I don't really understand him being taken off. But overall in this game, yes, he wasn't fantastic, but I thought he showed really good energy in the game. And to be honest, that's why I can't understand why he was subbed, because up until that point where he got taken off, I didn't see any drop in his performance, any drop in his stamina. So actually, I was quite surprised with that. But to be honest, you know, yes, he was looking to get crosses into the box, but there were quite a few times where he had fantastic chances to either cut inside and have a shot, or put a cross in rather than having a shot. And quite a lot of the time he took the wrong decision and nothing came from him. You know, there was quite a lot of the time where he would cut inside, and rather than trying to put it top corner or put it far post, near post, he'd try and just roll it across the floor into the bottom corner, which of course, Lloris being as good as he is, it was quite easy for him to do that. So for me, on 3 occasions in particular, rather than him just tamely shooting and rolling it across the ground, surely it would have been better for him to at least aim for one of the top corners, or at least try to put power on it so that it's harder and it tests Lloris. But to be honest, that is a shame, because if he had scored with them, or at least assisted another player, then maybe we'll be looking at his performance in a slightly different manner. But Andros Townsend here, I think a 6 is a fair result. Now to move on to the striker Christian Benteke, who I'm going to give a 6. Looked for the ball often but had no chances in the first half. Couple of defensive clearances but had nothing all day really. So Christian Benteke here, I've given him a 6, and although he's probably going to get a lot of abuse for this game, and certainly I can see sort of why, I personally think that yes, it wasn't the greatest performance from him here against Tottenham, but personally for me, I do think that some people are quite harsh in terms of giving him a 5. So I personally think, based on his performance and what I'm going to talk about, I do think a 6 is a fair result. But in terms of the first half in particular, you know, we weren't necessarily that great, and we were just sort of weathering the storm for that half. I thought that Benteke, like I said, because Tottenham were playing quite well, we had to look to get forward on the break. I thought when we did that, you know, the pace of Sørloth and Townsend got the ball into Benteke a few times. But ultimately, yes, he did look to get on the end of the ball and the end of crosses, but ultimately there was no real chances for him. And really, that's not because he didn't take them, it's purely because they weren't really created for him. So much like what we've been talking about quite a lot this season, he was isolated once again in this game. But the main thing for me, which gives him a 6 as opposed to a 5, which, you know, many people have given him, is, you know, the sheer amount of defensive clearances he made. You know, if you look at his heat map from the game, yes, it isn't ideal that your striker has most of his touches in his own half, but most of them are really important in terms of from corners, from, let's say, from free kicks as well. The fact that we've got that height and that strength for Benteke to actually head clear the ball was great to see as well, because, you know, for strikers, because he hasn't got the most pace, it's sometimes not necessarily better for you just to be waiting on the halfway line or waiting at the edge of the box, the other team's box. Maybe it's actually better for him to get involved. And actually, you know, people have criticised him for being lazy, not getting involved. But when he does get involved, obviously that means he has sort of less attacking threat. And because of that, he's obviously helping the team defensively, but people don't see that. So for me personally, if he's not going to, you know, if he's not getting the chances because they're not being created for him, then at least get involved in the play. And that's exactly what he done here. And, you know, there were a couple of these clearances from corners, from, you know, any set piece situation really, you know, whether it be corners or free kicks. There were quite a lot of the time where actually he was the guy to head it clear and obviously get rid of the danger. So really, much like a centre-back, he was doing his defensive jobs in terms of just clearing that danger and not giving the opposition in Spurs any chances. But to be honest, for me, nothing really all day. You know, didn't really have any chances himself, didn't really create any and didn't really receive any. So personally for me, I can understand it being a frustrating game for him, but also the fans, you know, really, we can be disappointed sitting in the stands. But to be honest, I know he's going to get more abuse because he obviously is another game not scoring, didn't assist in this game, wasn't really great. And to be honest, I can sort of see this in terms of a few chances he didn't take, and his movement wasn't exactly great. But personally for me, I think some of his criticism is unfair, because although people say he's lazy, he doesn't use his strength enough, I personally think that actually quite a lot of the time, even though he's not the paciest guy, I thought he went toe-to-toe with Sanchez in terms of speed. So quite a lot of the time, yes, he isn't that fast, but he would actually run at Sanchez and try and get through on goal. But to be honest, the only downside of that, I suppose, or the only negative, is he needs to show a bit more aggression. So although he's very physical, he's got lots of strength, maybe a little bit more aggression in that situation. So in terms of just shrugging off Sanchez as opposed to just giving the ball away quite easily. So maybe that would have been better. And if that's what people are criticising, then that's fair enough, I understand that. But criticising him because he was terrible in the game, I don't exactly see that, because I personally thought that his contribution in the game was actually quite good in terms of helping us on the counter-attack. And although he didn't get that many chances, when he did do them, if he had a little bit more movement, he probably would have scored from them. But for me personally, the main reason he didn't play that well in the game is because we weren't supplying him, and you can understand him not really playing well if you don't give him the chance to do so. But to be honest, another criticism I suppose is that he hangs on the far post too much. And to be honest, with us playing two strikers, or Sørloth playing as a striker and a left winger, because you've got him changing positions quite a lot to a 4-4-2 or 4-3-3, because we were changing formations quite a lot, that obviously meant that Benteke sometimes was central, sometimes at the near post. So maybe that movement was a bit confusing. It obviously meant that some of the time he was at the far post when actually he was meant to be the main striker in a 4-3-3. So he should have been more central. But whatever it was, I'm sure with time that can work out. And with Sørloth being quite adaptable, playing out wide, playing down the middle, hopefully we can actually, Benteke can get used to that and obviously adapt to that new system. But to be honest, we know how good he can be with heading the ball. Yes, we didn't get the ball to him enough in the game, but the rare few times we did do that, it would have been nice to see him run towards the near post a lot more. But one of the other things which I think is a positive about his game is the fact that he won 3 tackles. So once again, he's working harder than he normally does, harder than what he's done in before, and once again given that defensive contribution to the side, which of course a striker normally plays on the halfway line. You're giving that extra man behind the ball just to make sure you have that solidity at the back. And like I've said, yes, obviously he wins loads of headers. He's done exactly that in this game, but it weren't just necessarily winning offensive headers, but also, like I've said, getting back and actually making them defensive headers to keep us in the game. And to be honest, I'm sure that when Zaha comes back and Sørloth plays down the middle, Zaha out wide, giving us that little bit more option for Townsend and Zaha to cross the ball in. So surely, once we go back to a 4-4-2 system, Benteke won't have to keep drifting between two different systems. Obviously Benteke can play up front, and hopefully if we get more balls from Townsend and Zaha, then eventually, because of how well his work rate's been recently, hopefully Benteke will be able to get on them chances, and eventually, he's going to score, because if we supply him, he'll score. But at the moment we're not exactly doing that. And final thing really for me, before I go on to talk about our final player, today, or Sunday as it was a thankless task. It wasn't the best game from him, but it weren't necessarily the best game offensively from the whole team. And when you're playing on the counter-attack, a player who isn't necessarily fast and is more physical and is better with balls into the box, when you're playing counter-attacking football, that doesn't quite fit the way they play. So understandably, Benteke did struggle in the game. But do comment below your thoughts about Benteke's performance, and whether you do think the partnership with Alexander Sørloth is good or not. Now to move on to our final player and striker, Alexander Sørloth, who I'm going to give a 6. Perhaps out of position on the left, he's doing a shift though. Nothing much of a shout about in the first half. Nearly burst through in the box after a long ball and went over, but wasn't given a penalty. So Alexander Sørloth here, much like Benteke, yes, he wasn't necessarily involved in quite a lot in the game, but I still think a 6 is a fair reflection of his performance, because although he's a striker, he was playing out wide on the left, so understandably not playing that good when out of position, but I still thought he'd done a job which was great to see. And that's the thing I like about players. You like sort of MacArthur, who plays out wide when he's a central midfielder. Alexander Sørloth, he's meant to be a striker, he's playing out wide and he's still doing a job. So once again, showing that wherever he plays he'll give his all for the team, but also showing that adaptability, which of course is a bonus. Obviously in the first half I've talked about quite a lot of players in terms of their first half and second half performances. In the first half, Spurs putting us under a bit of pressure. Nothing really came from it, but they put us under pressure. Obviously Sørloth didn't really do much in that first half, so nothing really of note. Second half in comparison was a lot better, and personally for me, the main reason it bunks it up to a 6. And one thing in particular is, obviously, before I go on to talk about that penalty shout, literally picked up the ball on the edge of our area, ran about 20 yards, barged off 3 Tottenham players before the ball went out for a throw-in. So once again, he's showing that, much like Benteke, he's got that physicality, he's got that height, and actually, unlike Benteke, who's not necessarily good at dribbling, Sørloth's able to dribble past 3 players and out-muscle them, which of course is great to see. So the fact that people say, oh, he may not be up to the physicality of the Premier League, the fact that he can muscle off someone like Moussa Dembele, who is a very good central midfielder in my opinion, then of course that shows that, you know, it shows that he's actually a handful and he's quite difficult for the opposition to deal with. So that was obviously great to see as well. And another chance he had in the second half, obviously got the ball over the long ball over the top, managed to get a touch on it, went through and goal, obviously got brought down, but that was a fantastic tackle from Aurier. So you could say it was a penalty shout, but personally for me I think it was a good tackle from Aurier, got the ball and was able to clear that chance. So Sørloth showing that actually, yes, he can play out wide and he can dribble past players and carry the ball forward and obviously use his pace to create chances as well. But also when he plays down the middle, which is of course his natural position, he can obviously latch on to long balls over the top. And if it weren't for Aurier making that tackle, it would have been an easy tap-in for Sørloth to score his first goal in front of the Homestead. Because if you look back at it, great ball over the top, and obviously Sørloth, 2 players beside him. Obviously, you know, Aurier makes that save, but actually I think that, you know, he possibly, if Aurier hadn't made that tackle, he probably would have scored from that chance. But to be honest with me, I think a 6 is a fair result. You know, much like Benteke's performance, he didn't necessarily have loads of chances, but he's still done a shift in the side. But the thing I really like about his performance is, yes, he's a handful because he can run past players, but also the fact that he works hard. So he looks like, you know, he's looking like quite a good acquisition. Yes, obviously we'll have to see if he scores any goals yet, but the fact that he works hard for the team and he's actually got the pace, unlike Benteke, to actually go forward and play out wide or cut inside is obviously great to see. And obviously the strength as well is something that I and many fans do also like. And the final thing really for me to finish on is just saying that he's a mainstay of the side. So really that just epitomises his role in the side at the minute. So Alexander Sørloth there, I think a 6 is a fair result for him. So now to move on to the subs, Damien Delaney and Chung Lee. So obviously both these subs weren't really on the pitch long enough to make an impact, so I haven't really given them a rating. But in terms of Delaney's performance, you know, as soon as Tompkins went off and Chungy and Delaney came on, we conceded. And I'm not saying it's directly because they came on the pitch, but it was them in particular who made the mistakes, which ultimately led to us conceding the goals. So obviously Damien Delaney came on for Tompkins in the second half, obviously because Tompkins had that cramp. Delaney came on, you know, he hasn't played since the Brighton game. You can understand him being rusty. He was exactly that. You know, he was the man meant to be marking Kane for the goal, and obviously you can see that yes, he came off second best, and that's understandable because Harry Kane is in a form, you know, he's in fantastic form at the minute, you know, arguably one of the best in Europe. But the fact that Delaney didn't even jump, you know, Delaney's probably the same height as Kane, so Delaney, yes, obviously he lost his marker because how good Harry Kane is, but at least if you lose your marker, at least try and jump and block the shot, as opposed to just standing on the ground. And that can go to all 3 players who were around Harry Kane. Not one of them players actually did jump up, so people can blame Hennessy for not saving that shot, but also you've got to put a bit of blame on the defenders because they didn't actually try and jump up and you know, try and stop that header getting to Harry Kane. So personally for me, Damien Delaney, yes, obviously it's understandable him being a bit rusty, but when you're up against Harry Kane, you know, at least try and at least jump onto the ball. You know, even if you think you're not going to get it, at least try and put yourself there and actually block the shot to obviously stop Spurs from getting a chance. Because I'm sure that because we had James McArthur on the line, if Delaney was in the way from Harry Kane, he probably would have headed it across goal and McArthur probably would have been able to clear. But like I've said already, he came off second best up against Harry Kane. Understandably, he's probably going to lose that battle, but realistically, he should be doing better. Obviously, Chung Lee as well came on for Townsend. I talked about Townsend really. I thought he shouldn't have really come off. But it's nice to see Roy Hodgson make a tactical sub, which ultimately wasn't really going to do anything in the game realistically. But, you know, at least he made a sub. But I think the only touch of the ball he had was when he lost it. So, pass back in the midfield, he got the ball. And Harry Kane was closing him down. And what does Chung Lee do? Rather than just passing it back to Hennessy to clear or whatever, he tries to dribble past Harry Kane. Harry Kane gets the ball off him, and obviously Chung Lee has to kick it back into the halfway to obviously clear the danger. So like I've said, his one touch of the ball, he loses the ball and gives it away to Harry Kane. So not really ideal. But even though I didn't give them any ratings for both Delaney and Lee, probably I'd give them a 4 out of 10. You know, I don't normally give them a rating if they don't have the chance or the opportunity to make an impact. But realistically, because they both made mistakes leading up to that goal, the throw-in from Lee kicking the ball out was the one that led to the corner, which led to us conceding. So both these players, had some sort of fault in terms of that goal, but I probably would have given them a 4 out of 10 if they had played longer than they did. But like I've said, didn't really have much impact, didn't have time to make an impact, but we did concede as soon as they came on, so you've got to put that into consideration. But personally for me, just summarising the game as a whole, Spurs did deserve to win, so don't take nothing away from Tottenham, but I certainly do think that actually we didn't deserve to win, but we didn't deserve to draw either, we didn't deserve to lose. So it was something of a middle game, yes, we played well, but we didn't play well enough to draw the game. It would have been a still, but also we wouldn't have deserved to win anyway. So personally for me, I think it's a fair result in terms of losing the game. But if we had marked Harry Kane properly, we probably would have gone on to get a point. Maybe not deservedly, but still get a point. But to be honest, talking about the mistakes that Delaney and Lee made, the fact that we made it Harry Kane so easy, or we made it so easy for him to score the goal, really just summarises why Roy Hodgson doesn't like making subs. Because although we would love to see subs come off the bench and actually just give us fresh legs, but if they haven't got the quality, which Roy Hodgson clearly sees, if the players on the bench haven't got the quality to come on and make a difference, then understandably that's why you won't make subs, because they won't change the game. So personally for me, the likes of Delaney and Lee, they're not game changers, so realistically you can understand why Roy Hodgson wouldn't want to make any subs. The third bullet point really for me is we were undone by the Tompkins injury. So as soon as Tompkins got injured, we conceded, which really just shows that how well we were playing with him at the time and how well the system we had was working. And it just shows how important Tompkins was in the fact that as soon as he went off, we went on to concede. And the final point for me really, and this is something that quite a lot of fans have said, obviously Zaha's ahead of schedule in terms of his recovery from his injury, but we need him back so desperately, because this is the sort of game where it would have been a completely different proposition if on the counter-attack, rather than having someone like Benteke having to run for the ball and try and link up with Sørloth, if we actually had someone like Zaha who we could get the ball to him, Sørloth and Benteke could drift inside, and we've got Townsend on the other wing. If Zaha comes back and we could put the balls into the box, this game maybe would have been slightly different, because we would have had that pace and skill to get in behind. And obviously with us playing two strikers as opposed to one who plays in a 4-4-2 but also drifts out wide, rather than doing that, if we had Zaha, it probably would have been a totally different game, purely because we would have had a much better system which is obviously suited to the players, because I'm sure that Sørloth in particular would rather play out and out up front, down the middle, as opposed to playing out wide. But overall for me, I think 1-0 win is probably, credit to how well we defended, in terms of we've got all these injuries, but yet we still managed to almost keep a clean sheet against Spurs. Yes, it's disappointing to concede that late goal due to bad defending from the corner, but really for me, when you consider the injuries we have and the fact that Tottenham are playing quite well, I think it was inevitable to lose. But after that performance, I think we could argue that maybe a draw would have been a deserved result. So now I'm going to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and who I thought had the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now obviously, like I do every week, I sometimes talk about the performance, but I think I've done enough of that in the player rating section. But the one thing I'm going to talk about here, before I go on to give you the 4 nominations, is one player who misses out. Some may argue that McArthur should be the Man of the Match because of his pressing game and how important he was to us in terms of restricting Tottenham. But personally for me, basically me just reviewing the game, I thought that for me personally, maybe this is not the general opinion, but I thought that McArthur just misses out for me. Now for me it was between him and Riedewald, and Riedewald just edged it for me in terms of getting into that 4-man shortlist, so that's why I didn't select him. But for me personally, the only reason I picked Riedewald over McArthur is purely because of the chance that McArthur missed in the first half. There was one where he arrived late into the box, had a shot but didn't put enough power on it. Yes, he did have a good impact on the game in terms of his high press, but the fact that he missed this chance and Riedewald just had an overall consistent game overall, personally for me, that's why I put him in there instead of Riedewald, or that's why I put Riedewald in there instead of McArthur. So personally for me, do comment, I personally think that McArthur deserves to just miss out, not because his performance was worse, just because of that one little mistake. But do comment below with what you think and whether you do think McArthur should have been on the shortlist. But the 4 players I've nominated for the award are Wayne Hennessy, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, James Tompkins and Jara Riedewald. So obviously Wayne Hennessy as well, you know, I talked about him. Last few weeks he's been making quite a lot of important saves. Done exactly the same here, and that's why he's on the man of the match shortlist. You know, there was one save from Harry Kane from close range, which was a fantastic one-on-one save. Another one from Aurier, you know, cutting inside from the right, having a shot. Once again, Hennessy made himself big to make that save. And then another one from Ben Davies. You know, a crowded box, 5-6 players in front of him, and Hennessy was still able to get down low and stretch so far to make that save. So for me personally, for them 3 fantastic saves and his overall play, he deserves to be on the shortlist. In terms of Aaron Wan-Bissaka, obviously he was making his Premier League debut for Palace, and what a debut it was for him, because it was a fantastic performance. Obviously the thing that I liked about his performance is the fact that even though Spurs have got the threat from Lamela and Christian Eriksen, the fact that Wan-Bissaka actually cut out as many balls as he did, and the fact that he made as many blocks and tackles as he did was of course great to see. And overall I think he'd be very happy with his performance. You know, for me defensively I think we were quite sound, other than that defending for the goal. So really for me, in terms of having such a good defensive performance, he deserves to be on the shortlist as well. Obviously James Tompkins as well, obviously he went off injured, but like I keep saying, week in week out, he's almost always on the man of the match shortlist. But he was absolutely solid again. Like I've said in the play ratings, he was didn't put a foot wrong in the first half. He was alert, he was aware of what was happening around him. He was making clearances, blocks, and just stopping Tottenham from getting the ball in the area. And yes, he was fantastic in the first half, but also he was just as good in the second half. That consistency across both halves was of course great to see. He's been really good this season, and the fact that we ended up conceding when he went off the pitch is really just credit to how well he played, because I'm sure that if he had been on the pitch we probably wouldn't have conceded that goal. And obviously Jara Riedewald obviously came in instead of MacArthur. I thought that Riedewald formed a fantastic partnership in midfield alongside Luka again, so the fact that he was able to play alongside him, play so well, whilst also being good defensively and offensively, that was of course great to see. And you know, what you would expect from your central midfielder or your central defensive midfielder, you would expect them to protect the back four. He done exactly that, because I thought that in terms of playing alongside Luka, he went back and defended and made tackles really well. And in terms of going forward as well, spreading the ball, passing the ball out, he was of course great with that as well. And much like what I've said for quite a lot of the players, you know, Tompkins as well, you know, he was one of the players who was heading the ball on the edge of the area. So whenever Tottenham were putting balls into the area, because we were playing quite deep, Riedewald was of course there to make them headers and clear the danger. But for me personally, I think there's only one winner. You know, people may debate this in terms of, you know, whether this player does deserve to get it. But for me, I think Aaron Wan-Bissaka on his debut had a fantastic game. So congratulations, Aaron. You do deserve this Man of the Match award, and you obviously got the one from the vice chairman's, which of course was fully deserved. But personally for me, the thing that puts him above the other players is the fact that this was his first ever Premier League game, and the fact that he didn't let that pressure get to him and he performed so well is the main thing that does it for me. But the other thing really for me that puts him above the other players, the likes of Riedewald, Tompkins and Hennessy, is purely the fact that he actually used his attributes to good effect. The fact that obviously he's got pace, so he was able to get forward quite a lot, and the fact that he made numerous tackles and blocks, the fact that he made so many to keep us in the game, and the fact that he's so young and he was still able to do that is of course great to see. So personally for me, the fact that he went that little bit extra mile and still didn't let that occasion of his first team debut affect him, that was of course great to see, and the main reason he's got the Man of the Match award. But do comment below with what you think, and whether you do think MacArthur should have been included in the shortlist or not. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my Man of the Match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, James MacArthur, Patrick Vanano and Aaron Wan-Bissaka following the game.
James, commiserations. Just sum up your frustration and Palace's frustration to get nothing out of that today.
Yeah, it's pretty devastating, to be honest, to work so hard in a game, give it all, fight for everything, to concede at the end is hard to take.
In your minds, did you feel you'd almost done enough given the game plan that you'd executed?
Yeah, it was working well. Obviously they were causing us problems at times because they've got top quality players throughout their side and they're going to do that. But limited them to some chances, made it hard for them, and unfortunately we couldn't hold them out.
The Spurs manager said that you did make it difficult for them today. What was the game plan? It appeared to be to focus on squeezing the space in the centre. Yeah,
it was. We tried to force them down the sides. The manager had the game plan. I think it worked. Obviously a set piece cost us.
What can you take from this performance at least into these big games you've got coming up? You've got the likes of Liverpool, Manchester United, Chelsea to come now.
shows we can compete with the big boys. We've got a lot of injuries. Hopefully we'll get some back and that'll make us stronger again.
James, appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
How hard is that to take with the goal right at the end of the game?
I think my face says enough, man. Very disappointed, you know. I think we defended very well as a team today. We didn't create that much of a front, but defensively we were very strong, solid. And in the end, we just conceded from a corner, and I'm very disappointed.
To give you a heart, though, the team played well with the games coming up. We've got Man United here next week to give you confidence that you can set up well against those big teams.
Yeah, every game in the Premier League is tough, you know. We beat Chelsea at home. Why can't we not beat the big teams, you know? Today, just unfortunately, we lost the game in the end, but we got a whole week to recover, and we got next week to come Man United at home.
Young Aaron Wan-Bissaka starting the game today. Did you give him some words of encouragement before the game?
Aaron, yeah, he's a very good young player. I spoke to him. I always speak to him that he has to be patient and wait for his chance, because he's very good, talented, and he's young. So, but he did very well today, and I think it's for his first game to get against Tottenham. I think this is man of the match for me.
And congratulations on making your debut today. But first of all, the match. What are your thoughts on the game?
I think the lads, we fought very well. We tried our hardest to fight forward and defensively, but I think we were unlucky with the corner at the end. But over that, I think the lads worked hard, and also I'm happy to make my Premier League debut and start.
Yeah, how was it out there for you personally?
I wasn't nervous because I've been waiting for this for a long time. So I just tried to play it simple the first 15 as I was told, and then get through it throughout the whole game. So yeah, it was alright. I enjoyed it a lot.
When did you find out you were going to play?
The day before. They were naming the lineup, and they named the right back as me. And I was in shock but excited at the same time. So yeah, that was a good news to hear.
And you've been at the club since you were 11 years old?
Yeah, 11, yeah.
So always dreamt of making your debut here at Selhurst Park?
Always, yeah. Always.
What was it like in the dressing room before? Did people give you words of encouragement?
Yeah, I got encouragement from everyone, just to play with confidence. There's no pressure, just do what you've been doing. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's what I think I went in and done.
We saw you play against Liverpool in Hong Kong last year. Pretty big crowd there. What was it like in a packed Selhurst today?
Yeah, it was similar today, but I think more. Yeah, but that was alright. Yeah, I was playing at wing back then, so it's a bit similar to today's position.
And looking back, it was only last season that you moved from winger to playing right back. Are you pretty pleased that decision was made now?
Yeah, it's been a big move, and I think I've done well with that and made the right choice. So yeah, I'm happy with that decision.
Has it been good? Because we've seen Roy watching you play for the 23s down at the training ground. It's been good to have him watch you in those games.
Yeah, it is always. You know, you got to prove to him what you can do, and so to make him trust you, give you a chance. That's what I've been doing, just working hard and just waiting for this opportunity.
I've seen you've got the shirt there. What are you going to do with your first ever match shirt?
One, I think I'm going to frame that one in my mum's house, yeah. I'll do that.
Roy, commiserations. Sum up your emotions for us after that result and that performance also.
I think they're fairly easy to understand. Don't suppose I can really disguise it. I'm not an actor. I thought that it was a really hard-working performance from the players. I thought they gave everything they had for the club today. I can't really criticise anything in that way. Then, of course, to lose Tompkins to a severe cramp and have to make that last-minute replacement, and then to concede a goal so late in the game, it's very, very hard to take. Pardon me.
Did your approach, your execution today of your clear game plan, did it warrant something in terms of getting something out of the game, do you feel?
Well, and we came into the game extremely wounded in terms of the personnel and, you know, the players we can put out onto the field. It was barely that we can actually field a team at the moment, to be perfectly honest, and I thought they did exceptionally well. But I mean, we can't really say that we deserved to win the game, and you can't deny the fact that Tottenham had the best of the game and certainly had the best chances. But to fight as well as we did, and to show the spirit we did, and to work as hard as we did, when you actually do concede then in the 89th minute, it feels like it's a cruel blow, but we know what a cruel game football is, so we'll have to pick ourselves up and try to go again.
Disappointment today, of course, but given these big games we talked about pre-match that you've still got coming up, the likes of Liverpool, Manchester United and Chelsea, surely there's a lot that can be taken from today into those games.
Well, they'll be similar, I think. There's no doubt about that. You know, at the moment we don't have the firepower and the players that we would need to really go toe to toe with these teams. We're going to have to try and work hard and defend well and defend in depth. Work a lot harder than the opposition in terms of trying to keep them at bay, and then hope that you don't get the dagger thrust in the 89th minute when you're looking at the clock and thinking perhaps we'll be able to see this through and get a very, very good point.
Your injury problems have, as you said pre-match, been an opportunity for others. How did you think young Aaron Wan-Bissaka take his opportunity today?
I thought he was excellent. I mean, he had a lot of defending to do because they had so much of the ball and a lot of corner kicks and play around our penalty area, and I thought he did extremely well. I thought that he must be feeling very, very pleased with his performance, or as pleased as you can be when you come off the field, in the defeated team.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, James McArthur, Patrick Vidano and Aaron Wan-Bissaka had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Tottenham. But make sure to comment next week for a post-match review of the game against Manchester United. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.